Today is December the 14th. This is Addison Schonland. My guest today is Joachim Vermooten, who is a transport economist, a chartered accountant, and a senior business rescue practitioner based in Johannesburg, South Africa, though he tells me he's now at his beach house in Plettenberg Bay. Joachim, I'm jealous. It's cold where I am, and it's very warm where you are. Thank you for spending some
paradise time here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your paradise with us today. So what we want to talk about is South African Airways. It's been a source of some consternation, I guess, across the industry, with airlines falling apart all over the world. But the SAA story seems to have a special twist. What is the status right now with SAA?
Well, SAA is not operating and hasn't been operating for a number of months. It's got rid of all the leased aircraft, so it only has some A340, 600 and 300 aircraft left, which they want to sell, but haven't been able to source any buyers at the moment. So it's not operating, and it has a zero impact on the economy at the moment. Usually there's a big argument for stating it contributes to so many thousands of jobs, but the reality is it doesn't do so at the moment.
Okay, so go ahead.
SAA was restructured, and I was part of the team that was involved at that time from government side in the period 2007 to 2008. So in 18 months, it was totally turned around, and it remained profitable for 3 years, from 2009, 10 and 11. And unfortunately, since then, some major developments took place. The first was that a new mandate was developed for not only for SAA, but for all state-owned enterprises in South Africa, that of a development mandate. And what the development mandate exactly meant was never defined, except that it gave rise to the introduction of a lot of intermediaries that earned a lot of money and were able to drive around in Bentleys and Ferraris and all kinds of very fancy cars, basically earning money from a margin that there wasn't. Secondly, all the staff that was involved in the airline was actually terminated very quickly. And due to its mandate, not being a commercial mandate, it has not been successful. It's been running at a loss of about 6 billion per annum. And a number of so-called turnaround strategies and were adopted. But despite all of that, the company has been incurring about 6 billion losses per annum on a steady basis. So all these so-called strategies have not bear any fruit as yet. So that's where SAA is at the moment. There's a lot of unhappiness, of course. Taxpayers are unhappy because there wasn't a normal budgetary process taken towards the funding for SAA. So two ministers usually got together, issued various guarantees to various new banks. The banks would then give loans to SAA. And of course, that was really for funding of losses, not for any assets. Then once the banks want their money back, it has to be appropriated separately in Parliament. And of course, at that stage, there's a lot of unhappiness for budgetary allocations, of course. And that's a position where we are at the moment. So taxpayers are not very happy. The shareholder is not very happy. And neither is any other stakeholders. So the employees are definitely not happy because they haven't been paid in, say, about 8 months. despite of government assuring them that 1,000 of the, say, 5,000 would remain as firm employees, and 4,000 of them got voluntary settlement proposals, but none has been paid out, not the staff that remains, and also not the staff that accepted the voluntary settlement payments. So it's not a happy picture. And there's, of course, a limit to where Treasury is able to fund it. And that limit has definitely arrived.
Wow.
So that's the current position.
So if we look at where we are now and we look forward, if you had a scorecard, what would you give the new board that SAA or the government is proposing?
I think, personally, I don't think that SAA in its current business configuration has a chance of success. Since the so-called development mandate was adopted, the idea was to have a fully fledged airline that operates in all business areas, and then SAA would start a new business area, which is the so-called small narrow bodies, so crossover type of aircraft, which is really the domain of Airlink and South African Express, which doesn't operate today, and SimAir. So instead of contracting and focusing on a particular area and do that well, the scope is just widening again. And these are different businesses. So I would have thought that SAA would have a success possibility on operating, say, 5 or 6 international long distance or long haul routes. Then it has a clear focus and can, apply its expertise to that. But in order to branch out to, all the segments in the market is not the way to actually make it work. If you look at state-owned airlines that are really successful, they specialize in intercontinental long-haul operations. They don't actually operate, all the segments in the market, and that is what SAA and DPE is aspiring to today. So on that recipe, I don't see a big chance of survival. I would think that if SAA would focus on 5 or 6 intercontinental routes, they may stand a chance of really well-focused airline. But if not, I don't think it will work.
So really, if you were to, if you were given a blank sheet, you would say, focus on intercontinental markets, leave the domestic market alone?
Yes, definitely. There is no reason for SAA to operate any domestic services. There are enough private sector carriers that can do so and do so actually well. And SAA has not been operating it profitably. And why should the taxpayer pay for it? Because there are private sector carriers that have the appetite and the ability to actually muster it and operate it on a profitable basis. Then you get the regional operations, which some people think, or wrongly think, is very large. Because Africa is a very large continent. But you have to remember that if we look at OXA figures, that's all passengers operating on the regional services by all airlines to and from South Africa, then that only accounts for 4% of the domestic traffic volume. So it's very, very small. It's really too small to really build a separate business of. So I would think that either a focused small intercontinental operation could maybe work, but the domestic operation I would actually rule out.
Okay. So I was going to say, what would be your 3 options? You actually only have one, and it's really, that's it. That's their role.
That's my view,
What options are there to restart the airline?
I think it's very difficult because funding has been the problem for since 2012. You know, when the government decided to expand its role in the economy. That happened in 2012, and that's the reason why this, you know, they tried to expand services, etc., without being, without having a demand for it, you know. So once you start to operate too large aircraft with an inadequate demand, or routes where there's inadequate demand, or slap on tags to existing routes where there is inadequate demand, you will actually make losses, you know. So the larger you scale up a loss-making operation, the more losses you actually incur, you know. So the ideal way to have is actually some sort of business success with a positive business gross margin, and then roll that out larger. You know, that's the traditional way of doing things. But if you roll out a loss-making operation, you just increase your losses. You know?
Okay, so if we look at just this week, I think it was today, or maybe this was it Friday, when the new airline Lyft came sort of showed its colors. And you mentioned that there are several South African airlines, privately owned airlines, flying. There's also the state-owned Mango, which seems to be coming back. I see Comair and Kulula and British Airways. That brand is back, flying in the skies.
Okay, the thoughts or the projections at the moment for 2021 is basically that the domestic market demand would be about 30% of what it has been in 2019. That's very low. So the most important thing for the airlines is actually to try and balance demand to, or supply to demand, as you just can't carry on with your existing planning. We've seen some very interesting developments as far as business models are concerned. Airlink, which has been operating regional air services with regional aircraft, have now entered some of the major routes, which traditionally has been operated by 180-seater narrow-bodied aircraft. And it actually offers quite a good service with these Embraer 190s, where from a personal social distancing perspective, you have 4 across seats instead of 6 across on a narrow-bodied aircraft. So people like that a lot. SemAir, which has also been operating turboprop regional services, have been entering on a number of routes which they haven't been operating before. Of course, Fly Safair is really offering an extremely excellent service with probably the best on-time departure history in the world, not only in South Africa. So very, very efficient operator. But they have also come back in a smaller traffic volume or deployment of equipment. And then Comair with British Airways and the Kulula brands, they've come back at about 50% capacity of what they used to have. The one that hasn't done any restructuring is really Mango, the other state-owned subsidiary of SAA. And it has a lot of leased 737s. So if it is not operating the aircraft, it has to pay lease rates. And it has not come up with any restructuring plans to actually reduce its scale of operations. So there's now a big controversy going on 2.7 billion that has to go to the 2 subsidiaries which were not provided for in the business plan of the business rescue practitioners for SAA. And National Treasury wants that to flow before any staff salaries are paid. So that's going to be quite a big thing. But I really think that Mango also needs to go through a restructuring of some sorts because you can't carry on with the capacity that you had before. And the market just can't sustain that, So that's a worry that I have.
But one quick question then, with the arrival of lift, can the market sustain even more capacity?
Yeah, I think Lyft is entering the market with 3 aircraft, so it's relatively small. It's entering on the largest South African route, which is Cape Town, Johannesburg, which is, depending on who you listen to, either the 9th to the 12th busiest route in the world. So that's a comfortable route. The route can absorb, extra capacity. And then George is a very, very popular route, especially for holiday makers and the whole golfing fraternity. And its tariffs is really high, so we need additional competition there as well. So I think, I don't know what their future plans are, but these 2 routes would certainly work for them, in my view.
Joachim, this has been a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you for bringing us up to speed. Much appreciate your time.
Okay, all the best and see you again.
Thank you.